Behind the net, centers, flat, finds to Clark, shot, rebound, score! Scores the game winner at 12 minutes and 1 second of Sunday.
Hey everybody, it's Isaiah. Just reminding you that FlyersNittyGritty.com and the O&B Puckcast are brought to you by Summit Public Adjusters. Hey, do you have damage to your home? Not sure who to call? We suggest that you call Summit Public Adjusters before your insurance company. Dealing with your insurance company can be very stressful. Let Summit take the stress out of the claims process. From storm damage to your roof, to toilet overflows, to broken pipes and fires, Summit gets you the most money for your repairs. So next time Mother Nature leaves you in need of repairs, call Summit Public Adjusters at 215-752-0560 or visit summitpublicadjusters.com. Licensed in PA and New Jersey. And we are back. It is Isaiah. Welcome to the O&B Puckcast, episode number 154, brought to you by FlyersNittyGritty.com and Jim South Street, 400 South Street, 40 years of the best cheesesteaks and hoagies in the grandest Philadelphia tradition. And if you live down near Jim's, check it out. They use DoorDash if you can't get over, and they'll get that delicious food right to your door. So the next time you want that great cheesesteak, hoagie, or some great fries, check out Jim's South Street, 400 South Street in Philadelphia, PA. And with that, let's introduce our panel. Unfortunately, the great Dan Silver is out. He's in sickbay, not doing too bad. We expect him back, but he will not be able to make it. We do have an original member of the O&B Puckcast with us tonight. And, of course, that's always Chef B. How are you?
Very good. Enjoying these hockey playoffs. You know, as our guest will probably talk about in a couple of minutes, I really thought the Kings would be a little bit further along than they are. I had them going a little bit longer than they were. So it's interesting to see an in-town perspective from on the other side of the coast to tell us what happened and all. So it should be fun.
Sure. No, absolutely. And with that, yes, not every team has a reporter, an insider, but the LA Kings have someone known as the Mayor, and you can catch him on Sirius XM NHL. He's also at mayorsmanor.com and with our buddy DB on Kings of the Podcast, a great podcast. His name is John Hoven. John, welcome aboard.
What's happening, boys? Looking forward to it. Let's get into it.
All right. Great. Hey, listen, John, you know, we've had Shane Malloy on a couple times talking about the Flyers organizational structure, and we talked a lot on the O&B Puckcast about how, you know, certain teams like Boston, and it seems now like the LA Kings, have been able to avoid that big blow up, that big rebuild from the ground up, while being able to build on some of the success with some stars that hung around. And you have a new generation. And after some pain and Rob Blake taking over in April of 2017, after a predictable bit of pain, he brings in Todd McClellan. And now, you know, after about 4 years or so, or I guess a fifth season, he has moved the Kings into a spot where they made the playoffs. They made a good showing against the Edmonton Oilers and have a lot of young, high-end talent that should bring them some really good success in the years to come. And I just wanted to get your feeling about, you know, what the Kings are as an organization and what you like about what they were able to do, particularly when Rob Blake took over.
Well, when Blake took over, I mean, there's sort of been different chapters of Rob Blake as the general manager. When he first took over, there was a desire within management and probably even within Blakey himself to sort of continue the path that Dean Lombardi had started. And so, you saw the exit of Daryl Sutter, who was the longtime coach under Dean Lombardi and helped the Kings win a couple of Stanley Cups. He left with Dean. John Stevens, who had been, probably promised the job on a handshake agreement when he signed his contract extension, moves into the role as the head coach. And that allowed for some continuity, swinging the pendulum all the other way. You have Daryl Sutter, who's a taskmaster, and then you had John Stevens, who, I don't want to say he was a coddler, but he certainly was more friendly, and it created a different air around the team. They tried that. It worked, opening up the reins offensively and just creating a breath of fresh air around the club allowed them to have some initial success. And they played Las Vegas, and they didn't make it out of the first round, and they went out and signed Kovalchuk because the only thing they really had at that particular moment to be able to work with without mortgaging the future was cap space. And so, people look back on that deal and they want to, poo-poo that deal, but it made sense at the time because they were able to use one of their very few assets that they had, like I said, that wouldn't mortgage the future,
Sure.
In December of 2018, though, is really when this new chapter began, which is the retooling of the LA Kings. And it was a multi-year process. They knew what they were going to do. They had a plan. They didn't want to tear it all down in one motion, but they knew that they were systematically going to spend the next couple of years being a lottery team. And they wanted to, get a top 5 pick in 2019, get a top 5 pick in 2020, and then start the progression from there. COVID and the pandemic, I think, sort of set them back a year in terms of what their plan was. But it actually helped them because putting them in a position to be able to draft Brandt Clark is ultimately going to, pay dividends for them because they need that right shot, offensive-minded defenseman that they didn't really have, in the pipeline. They have a lot of high-end talent. They have a lot of young players that are going to help them in the future years. But being able to add Byfield, being able to add Brandt Clark certainly sets them up as they move forward into the future years. So in terms of where they are right now, you could say for the most part, they're right on track. If you go back to 2018, December of 2018, and what the plan was to send out some of the veterans, right? And Jake Muzzin and Alec Martinez and Jeff Carter, those guys were going to leave. They were going to hold on to their core 4 in Kopitar, Doughty, Quick, and Brown. And, they were going to try to retool, recreate this club. And now they're in a position where the past is the past and everybody's looking forward, and everybody's looking forward specifically to the next 2 to 3 years to see if they can make this team a championship contending team again.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I look at teams that have tried to do this, like the Flyers, and I'd probably mention Boston as well. I mean, Boston it was more immediate. There was less of a lag. I think they missed the playoffs one time, and they were able to kind of, not skip too many beats. But now their run from 2011 is more looking like it's over. They just let go of their coach, Bruce Cassidy, today, which surprised a lot of people. But like you said, the Kings now, I mean, we have players like Brandt Clark, who was number 8 overall last year, and Quentin Byfield, who he'd be considered a top-line center prospect, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, the long-term plan is to move Byfield into that 1C role, but you have a lot of fans and media as well that are impatient and they want to look at just his stat line and they'll want to say, oh, that's not going to work. And, that sort of thing. He's a very young player and it takes a long time for some players to mature. It's not just, this isn't fantasy hockey. This is the real world. The National Hockey League is the best league in the world. It is extremely difficult for players to come in their first year from college, from Europe, from the CHL, and jump into superstar positions. Yes, it happens. Periodically, randomly, players come in and they have an immediate impact. But the years of a guy like Teemu Selanne coming in and, lighting up the league and setting scoring records, those type of things just don't exist anymore. The last time we saw it in Los Angeles specifically was with Drew Doughty. You're seeing him as a teenager come into the NHL and have a lot of success, but it just doesn't happen that way most of the time. Most of the time, it's the more traditional path where a player turns pro, needs to spend 2 to 3 years developing in the AHL, becoming a pro player, filling out their body. And that's really where Quinton Byfield is. Byfield came in. He was, you talk about, again, the pandemic and how it might have benefited. I think it really benefited the organization from a prospect perspective, because guys like Quinton Byfield and Arthur Kaliev, they would have absolutely been in the Ontario Hockey League last season had it not been for the pandemic, shutting down that and then getting those exemptions to play in the American Hockey League. So last year at the AHL level, the Kings had an extremely young team. They were dominated on their top 6 forwards, were all young players, first-year pros. You had guys, like Turcotte and like Kaliev and so on and so forth, that were able to cut their teeth in the American League. And then this year, moving Byfield into that third-line role after he came back from his injury, we're still at the very, infancy of his professional career. Hell, he missed the first half of the season this year with injury. So it's far too early to draw any conclusions on Quinton Byfield. But I guess the short answer, after giving you the long-winded answer, is yes, you eventually have Quinton Byfield penciled in as the 1C, and a guy like Anze Kopitar drops down to the 2C, and Phil Deneau becomes the 3C here in Los Angeles.
Right. No, but it's all a piece of having the puzzle pieces together and having them in place, knowing that you have a certain timeline with certain players like Kopitar and Doughty. And it seems like, is Brandt Clark someone maybe who's an heir apparent for Drew Doughty, that type of thing. So guys can step into more appropriate roles at a different stage of their career. Yeah,
no, for sure. I mean, you here in Los Angeles, a lot of fans and media as well were upset with a guy like Alex Iafallo, who was an unrestricted free agent signed out of college, but playing on the top line with Anze Kopitar. And, there sort of were two things at play. One is they didn't have another player in the organization really to play on that top line, because you want your younger players to develop before you rush them into top line minutes, number one. And then number two, you have a player playing there who has chemistry and plays well with a guy like Kopitar, and the organization, and to that extent, the coaching staff and the player all know that the long-term plan is to move a guy like Iafallo into a second or maybe even a third line left wing spot. But, temporarily for a year or a few years, he's going to hold down that spot. And, you see that defensively as well. Mikey Anderson, who, has a tremendous amount of leadership and looks to be a player who might wear an A with the LA Kings going forward. He might not ultimately be the guy that's paired on that top pairing defensively forever. If they were to come up with a left shot defenseman that gives them more, then he might slide down into becoming a second pair type of defenseman. But back to Brandt Clark, yes, he's drafted and he is considered to be the heir apparent to Drew Doughty at some point. But you just don't want to tell Drew Doughty that, because he thinks he's going to play forever.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Chef?
Reviewing Cap Friendly, and I see, but I look and I see you guys out in LA, you got a lot of young talent there that's coming up on RFAs and UFAs. Are we going to see the expertise or some savviness from Blake here as he tries to maneuver and keep some of these kids and make some deals around? Because I'm just curious, because here in Philly, we're maxed out at the cap, and I would love to see some kind of hint of what can be done, and maybe from somebody that has got a little more savvy than what we're used to in Philly.
Well, I would say a few things. I would say, one, in Los Angeles, looking ahead and projecting 2, 3, 4 years out has been critical. From the very beginning when Rob Blake came in, he's taking over, and you don't want to say cleaning up the mess of Dean Lombardi, but he's taking over somebody else's checkbook, right? He's taking over somebody else's balance sheet. So those are contracts that he didn't sign players to, but that he has to maneuver around, and he has to find the right time when you trade away certain players for assets. He also has to take a look when you're re-signing a guy like Alex Iafallo and you sign him to a 4-year deal at a certain dollar amount. What's the right dollar amount and what's the right term to be able to sign a player like that because of other guys that are coming due? But the situation that I would probably point to the most when it comes to, really understanding the cap and how the dollars work, some people last summer, and this might sound funny now given the season that Deneau had, but a lot of people, many people last year were questioning the signing of Phil Deneau from both a term perspective and a dollar perspective. So a double whammy, right? Mm-hmm. But the reality is, if you look at that contract, it made a tremendous amount of sense because of what they were trying to do. And so you had Quentin Byfield, who for the next 3 years is on an entry-level deal. And so what you really wanted to do is you needed to add those two numbers together. You add the number from Byfield and you add the number for Danault together. You're getting Byfield on the cheap. You might be overpaying for Danault according to market value. Again, this all goes back to last summer. Right now, Blake and company look like a genius, and Danault probably wishes he was at a UFA this summer, coming off the career year that he just had. But when you go back to last summer, that's really the way you had to look at it, and say, hey, hold on a minute. This makes perfect sense cap-wise because you can add those two numbers together. And, you see teams sometimes do that with goaltending as well, right? It's not just what you're paying your starting goaltender. It's what you're paying for the two of them added together. And so the Danault contract ends up, looking a lot better now. But even if he didn't have a career year, you can see why the math part of it starts to work. And so in some other areas, the Kings, and for that matter, the Flyers probably need to start to look at a few situations like that in terms of bundling things together so that it makes mathematical sense.
Yeah, I do believe we were one of the podcasts out there that questioned that signing too, right, Isaiah? Thought he was getting overpaid, because I know a lot of Flyer fans at the time were wondering if he would fit into our plans.
Well, you look at Phil Danault, and he like John was saying, I mean, he fills that spot, no pun intended, of course, allowing Byfield to kind of bide his time and, let everybody fall into place at the right time as the timeline warrants. So it definitely, it's a nice little spot in there. And he's obviously got a lot in the tank, as he proved this year. John, I wanted to you emphasize something that the Flyers have not been able to do. You talked about at the AHL level, you had all these young kids, which this is something the Flyers really have not been able to do. Get them all to play on the AHL team. They probably haven't been able to do that since circa 2005. I'm talking about the Flyers. And it had all these kids. And you talked about the pandemic having something to do with that. But what happens is you build a culture, you build camaraderie. And by the time these guys come up to the Kings, they already have each other's back. They kind of know what it's like to be a King in some respect, as opposed to a guy here or a guy there surrounded by a bunch of AHL veterans, which has been the rule with the Flyers.
Yeah, well, you talk about structure, and the Flyers needing to put some structure back in their game, and a team that has a lot of, or a franchise, that's had a lot of identity historically. The Kings had a very strong identity for a good 10 years there. And the identity started to erode a little bit coming off of the Cup years. And that happens in many organizations. Guys get paid, guys get older, guys have families, their priorities change, et cetera. And there isn't that, hey, let's, win it for the team mentality that there might have been when they're younger and when they're hungry or when they haven't won. Some guys never lose that edge. Other guys, it's a natural sort of maturation process that takes place. But it was time for the Kings specifically to establish a new identity. I won't say find their identity, but it was time for them to establish a new identity. And that's one of the reasons why, ultimately some of those earlier moves that were made in chapter one of Blake's tenure as GM, including the coaching staff, why those guys weren't there anymore or aren't there anymore. And you bring in Todd McClellan to do just that, to reestablish identity. Todd was very quick to point out that, look, he doesn't want to create the identity per se. He wants the identity to be created and developed in a more organic fashion. But at the American League level, you're absolutely right that when you look at age distribution, having the ability to get all of those players to play at the AHL level together and create that identity, it does build a bond. And we've already seen here in Los Angeles some of the benefits of that. And I think it's only going to continue in the out years. But having that continuity between the two clubs specifically helped the LA Kings this year because they were decimated by injuries far beyond just Drew Doughty. You looked at one point this season, all 6 of their starting defensemen from the opening night were not in the lineup. They were playing with 6 replacement defensemen, which is absolutely crazy at the NHL level. But so many of these players ended up being really plug-and-play situations. Guys like Jordan Spence. This is a true rookie, his first professional year, not a rookie in the National Hockey League. He's a first-year pro just coming out of playing junior hockey, but gets plugged right into an NHL role due to, necessity, and the team doesn't skip a beat. So the identity of the NHL club, firmly is established at the AHL level, and the system and the structure, there needs to be continuity between those two organizations, and that's when things really start to roll. And here in Los Angeles, the benefits are already apparent. Just this one season as a specific point in cause.
How much of that was left over from Lombardi, or did a lot of that have to be remade by Rob Blake? Who's his assistant GM there?
Well, there is no assistant GM as of yet in Los Angeles, but Rob Blake, has a few key people that have a seat at the table, including Mark Yanetti is the director of amateur scouting. He's been the constant. He's really, as far as I'm concerned, the smartest man in hockey. I've said that for many, many years. He's just an extremely intelligent person. If you listen to him, your IQ instantly gains points just by having a conversation with him. And he's done a phenomenal job as the person responsible for, the primary person, I should say, responsible for, drafting all of this talent that's come into the organization now almost in two separate batches, two separate generations. A lot of the guys that were drafted to help the Kings win cups in 2012 and 2014, and then through this recreation of the LA Kings and the prospect pool that they have now. So once upon a time, they had the top prospect pool in hockey, and they now once again have the top prospect pool many, many years later, loaded by really the drafts over the last 4 years. So you have Mark Yanetti. You also have Nelson Emerson, the director of player personnel. You have guys like Glenn Murray, who's oversees the development side of things. So it's a tight-knit group that Rob Blake has that helps him, make decisions, or that he leans into when making decisions on his own. But to the point about Lombardi, don't discount the impact that a guy like Mike Stothers had on the organization as the head coach of the American Hockey League, winning a Calder Cup for the team with their last year in Manchester before the club was moved out west into Ontario to be, a suburb of Los Angeles, so to be closer to the parent club. Stothers' contract was not renewed a few years ago, and they went a different direction. And it's been a little bit of a bumpy road at the AHL level, quite honestly. John Robleski was brought in. He was only able to coach. There was the shortened season last year because of COVID. And then there was this season, and he ended up taking a personal leave and ultimately resigning halfway through. So he never even coached a full season at the American League level. And we'll have to see where they go moving forward. But you'll see the fingerprints of Todd McClellan's structure all over both organizations, both the Ontario Reign at the American League level and the LA Kings at the NHL level.
Gotcha. You look at the team page and you look at the organizational structure, and the Flyers really, I'm sure they are building something like this. We talk about hockey operations. They have a research and development department, something Shane Malloy was talking about, which a lot of people call analytics, but it goes deeper than that. And then, of course, you have the development area. Is that Mike Donnelly, and you mentioned somebody else?
Glenn Murray is heads up that group. But I mean, you have a lot of former NHL players that are involved. Yes, Mike Donnelly is involved. Jared Stoll is involved. Sean O'Donnell is involved. Mike O'Connell used to be involved. So there also have been a number of key management personnel, that have left over the last couple of years. Guys like Mike Fuda, guys like Mike O'Connell, et cetera. Some of the holdovers from the Dean Lombardi era, if you will. And so there's been a bit of a transition that has taken place among management as much as there has been, among the players on the ice.
Yeah, well, whatever they're doing, they've been able to manage that transition. And this is an area that it's pretty well documented, or the opinion is out there that this is the area where the Flyers, who had a top 5 ranked farm system for a few years running, didn't get the development and didn't get the end result that we're seeing with the LA Kings. And, some of the kids with the Kings really haven't come close to having a chance to even hit their top side. Turcotte as a player is having concussion issues apparently, but I'm sure there's still high hopes for him. Kaliev is starting to score, and Rasmus Kupari, a guy I wanted the Flyers to get when they drafted Jay O'Brien. So, I mean, there's still a lot of meat on that bone, and this is an area where the Kings have really struck gold.
Well, the Kings tried to trade up to get Joel Farabee, but the Flyers weren't having any of it. So if you'd like to make a trade, Rasmus Kupari, for Joel Farabee, I'm sure that LA Kings management would be more than happy to listen.
No, well, we'll give it Jay O'Brien, who was drafted for him instead. But I hear you. So listen, this is not kiss the LA Kings butt night, but I think when you look at what teams are doing well, why reinvent the wheel? Model current success, and it looks like at times the Flyers have tried to do this. After, hiring, Mike O'Connell's now with the Flyers. Dean Lombardi's here. We had Ron Hextall. So obviously there was an attempt to replicate that success. It just hasn't happened. And when a player is in their system, is there an established protocol that has been in place for a long time? Has it been reworked? I guess I'm trying to get to the nuts and bolts of this to try and break down what the Flyers could do better based on what the Kings are doing.
Well, player development really is all about communication and repetition. Communication, from the communication standpoint, the entire organization has to be on the same page regarding development. It's critical that the coaching staff and the development staff at the American League level understand what is needed and the timeline of when certain players are expected to be ready. And you would hear coaches at the AHL level talk about that. Hey, management told us they need this player ready by X date, and therefore that's what our coaching, that's how we're allocating playing time. That's how, when we spend time on development, there's certain things that we need to work on to get them ready by a specific time. And repetition, right? Being able to give those players enough reps in practice, in game situations, et cetera. But to a point you were saying just a moment ago, I'll tell a funny story that was relayed by Mark Yanetti, and back to the wisdom that you get from a guy like that. He was talking about early on in the tenure of Dean Lombardi, how they were trying to model other franchises, right? Because it is a copycat league and everyone's chasing whatever the current trend is. They were trying to be the Detroit Red Wings for a while. They were trying to be the Boston Bruins for a while, and so on. But as he pointed out, the problem is that oftentimes you try and it takes so long to implement that and to become that. And by the time you become that, the league has moved on to what the next best thing is. And so their management group got together and said, look, what we need to do is we need to become the LA Kings. We need to lock in what our formula is going to be that's going to breed success, believe in it, have confidence in it, and that's who we want to become. And that's what they did with their cup run in 2012. And I would say, from that standpoint, to any franchise, it's not about trying to model after the Kings or model after the Tampa Bay Lightning or whatever organization you think is having a lot of success. Toronto, even though that they're not having playoff success, but whatever the Colorado, you need to become the best that your organization can possibly be, and you need to establish the identity that your organization is capable of, because it's very difficult to become another organization because they are the aggregate of all of the players that they have, the coaches that they have, the identity that they have, the structure that they have, and so on. It's very difficult to flip over, 20 of your 50 contracts. It's a very difficult thing to do. So it's about putting your players in the position for success. And I think that's one of the things really that LA has found success with through the years is taking a player that other teams might see differently. A better defensive player, making him more offensive, a better offensive player, making them more defensive oriented or whatever. But they found a way to take certain players and make them thrive in their structure and their identity and who they want to be as a team. And I think that's really what Todd McClellan, Rob Blake, and all the other names of people that we mentioned earlier, Nelson Emerson, Glenn Murray, et cetera, are trying to do with this current group down in Ontario. Get them all ready for the positions that they're going to be placed in when they make it up to the big club and try to have success at the NHL level.
Yep, definitely. They're doing a great job with that. So what is next for LA? They obviously have some needs, and you probably need an impact defenseman who's kind of in between where, Drew Doughty is and Brant Clark, hoping to win a job next year. And it looks like they need some scoring and more of players that can help their power play. I mean, what do you anticipate them doing going into this offseason?
Well, they need to address, four things in no particular order. They do need to address their power play, but addressing some of these other things that I'll mention will help address the power play, hopefully. And some of the power play will come from more skilled players, but some of the power play improvement will also just come from better coaching as well. So the three main things they're looking to add would be toughness, a left shot defenseman, and a top line left wing. And, that's probably not that different than many other teams that are out there this offseason. They're going to look to add some grit and some toughness because Tampa's proven you can't win on skill alone. They're going to look to add a top 6 forward. A lot of teams want one of those. And they're going to look to add a top 4 defenseman, and a lot of teams want one of those. But the Kings' needs within the forward and defensive groups are a little bit more specific. The Kings are really loaded from a depth perspective down the right side. There are about 8 or 9 players that are fighting for those 3 spots as a right shot defenseman. So their need is very specific. It's a left shot defenseman. Their need is also rather specific from an age distribution standpoint. They could go the route of getting another bridge player, whether that's re-signing Edler, could be re-signing Mata, finding somebody similar. That's a bridge situation. Ideally, what they would like to do is get a younger player, 24, 25 years old, who can grow with this next core and, complement guys like Brant Clark, guys like Mikey Anderson, Brock Faber, Helga Grans, Jordan Spence, these younger players that they have. Left wing one, that's a need specific based upon the hole they have within their forward group. Adrian Kempe, this year obviously had a career year. He solidified his spot playing with Andrzej Kopitar. Second line looks good. They like to keep Arvidsson with Deneau. And Trevor Moore, you could say, well, does he really belong on the second line? But back to the point I made earlier about Iafallo. Sometimes players just have chemistry, and there's no denying the chemistry between Trevor Moore, Arvidsson, and Deneau this year. So no one's going to be in a hurry to break up that second line. And, they'll probably have a kid line on the third line with, either Iafallo with Byfield and Kaliev, or if Iafallo was to somehow be moved for cap reasons, you could potentially play Grunstrom on that line with Kaliev and Byfield. We'll call it the kid line for lack of a better name. And it creates that opening at left wing one. So, again, a very specific need, and they probably need somebody even that is a right shot, if at all possible, because they are very short on right shots. It's a team heavy on left shots among their forward group. So add toughness in. That's something they're looking for as an upgrade over Brendan Lemieux. If they're not able to find it from a cap perspective or from a talent perspective, they could potentially circle back to Lemieux and find a way to bring him back on a short-term bridge deal. But I think ultimately they would get size and toughness and add a defenseman and add a forward. If they can hit those 3 things, then you would consider it to be a very successful summer for GM Rob Blake.
Gotcha. Chef?
I was just curious. Are they satisfied with their goaltending situation?
Look, the goaltending, would they want more from their goaltending position? Sure, absolutely. Only because they signed Cal Peterson to, we'll call it a big money long-term contract, and Jonathan Quick this season ended up stealing the net back from him. Yeah. So do they want more? Sure, but they want more internally. They're not looking to make a move. I'd be very surprised if they made a move on a goaltender. Their goaltending position is set for next year. That'll have Jonathan Quick back with Cal Peterson. I said on Kings of the Podcast the other day, for my money, I think the X factor in all of this, and the Kings roster hasn't even been decided yet, but I think when all is said and done and we're on October 13th on opening night for the LA Kings, I think the X factor going into the season is going to be Cal Peterson. They will go as far as Cal Peterson will be able to take them. I just don't think you can expect Jonathan Quick to come back and do it again next year and be the starting goaltender in game 1 of the playoffs. So Cal Peterson is going to really need to rise to the occasion next year and wrestle the reins away from a guy who has proven to be very competitive, even after all the NHL games that he's played and at his age. Jonathan Quick is not going to give up that net easily. So a lot of pressure on Cal Peterson coming into next season.
Yeah. John, just a couple more from me. Ivan Provorov and Travis Sanheim are 2 defensemen that kind of match the profile of players that would really fit very well on the LA Kings roster. It's been rumored that one of them, for different reasons, could be available. Provorov maybe needs a change, needs to play with someone who has kind of like a mentor presence on the blue line like Drew Doughty would. Travis Sanheim's up on a contract next year. The Flyers, despite being a 61-point team last year, find themselves in cap trouble. That doesn't speak well to the management. Besides Joel Farabee, or some of those other players, would either one of those players be of interest?
Yeah, for sure, right? Both of them would be. We wrote an article, I think 2 years ago, that Sanheim was one of the players that the Kings could and should target because you weren't sure sort of how he fit into things there long term. If you want to get a little bit more, sort of offensive, at least from a potential perspective, then Provorov might be the guy that you would look at. But I would question those are two different players, and I would just think that the cost in terms of the asset cost versus the potential upside probably wouldn't be the player that I would target if I was the general manager, at least.
Gotcha. Yeah, the Flyers also have a surfeit of right shots that they need to make some decisions about. Travis Konechny is a player who could possibly play on the left side. He's also someone who has been in the rumor mill, like the Flyers in scoring last year, but has been a little inconsistent. But, you look at a guy like Adrian Kempe, it takes a while for some of these kids. And all of a sudden the light goes on and here they are. They're the player you thought they would be just maybe a couple years later.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. That's a player that probably doesn't have the size of what they're looking for. The Kings have a lot of players that are in that, 5'10" to 5'11" range, whether you're talking about Turcotte or a lot of the other prospects that are coming through. There's certainly nothing wrong with the player, and the goal totals have been, around where you would have expected. I think it was a little decline. He didn't hit the 20-goal mark this year, if I remember correctly.
No, you're correct. Yeah.
Yeah, but he has hit it several times in the past. So, and he's probably about 25 years old, if memory serves me correctly.
Yeah, he's right at 25, exactly.
Yeah. So, you're talking about, from an age distribution standpoint, that's right along the lines of what you're looking for. But again, is that a player that you think can fill the left wing one position? Because if he can't play left wing one, as good of a player as he might be, he's just not checking the box that they need in Los Angeles. And so back to what I said earlier, it's a very specific ask of what they're looking for on the defensive side of things, as well as the offensive side of things. And so sometimes when you say, no, that's not a good fit for LA, people think you're dumping on the player. I'm not dumping on the player. It's just there's not a spot for him. They filled that right wing spot when they went out and picked up Victor Arvidsson.
Right. Gotcha. And it is a lot. It speaks to the fact that now that they are in a situation where expectations are starting to be raised for the Kings, you have to be picky. You can't be cavalier about it. The Flyers are in a situation where they can't be picky because they're capped out, and they need to. The cap space is outside of like your top echelon players. Cap space is as valuable as anything these days. Cap space, yes, it absolutely is important. And that Blake spent the early part of his tenure as GM kind of cleaning up some of the books that he inherited from Dean Lombardi, but that, more recently in recent years, he's done an outstanding job of signing players to deals that are more cap friendly towards the Kings than they are cap friendly towards the player. So that's something he's going to look to continue to do this summer as he has to re-sign Adrian Kempe. If you could do a deal at like 5x5, that's fantastic. If the player's looking for more like $6 to $7 million, then that's going to create some angst and some issues for Los Angeles, especially with only one proven year really under his belt. Absolutely. So, John, last question for me. What from 3,000 miles away, what have come to mind in terms of recommendations?
Well, you guys have the goaltender, right? So it all starts, if you're going to build an organization from the net out, which is what Dean Lombardi preached in Los Angeles and worked out pretty well for the LA Kings, you have the goaltender. So now you go on to the next position and you start defensively. And you talked about a couple of those younger defensemen that might need a change of scenery. Do they need a change of scenery, or do they really just need to be surrounded by a winning culture? And so sometimes bringing in a veteran within that group that can change the tone, can change the message, and a player that can be on the same page with the coaching staff can help bridge that gap and also help in the maturation process of those younger players. And I think of a player like Rob Scuderi, who the Kings overpaid to get according to market value, but it paid for itself, tenfold over in the way that he helped mentor those younger players, especially a guy like Drew Doughty, and also what he meant to the coaching staff because of the reliability that the coaching staff and the comfortability the coaching staff had with him. And Willie Mitchell was another player from a veteran perspective that came in and added to that LA Kings group. So it's finding the right mix. It's obviously a lot easier said than done. And when you're playing fantasy hockey, it's much, much easier. When you're the general manager of a National Hockey League club, you only have a couple moves that you can make every summer. You're not making wholesale changes. You're not changing 7 key players. You only have 1 or 2 big moves that you're going to be able to make every summer. And the rest are more of a supporting cast type thing. So you better get those 1 or 2 key moves right, whether it's the key moves of trading somebody out, creating roster spots or playing time for other players, or whether it's the key additions of bringing in 1 or 2 players. And so those are some of the things that I would really focus on. But it starts with the general manager and the coach being on the same page about the identity and the style of play that you want to play the following season.
Makes sense here. John, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. Where can people find your work? What's upcoming for you?
Well, of course, you can always follow me on Twitter @MayorNHL. That's where the Flyers fans love to come on and give me a hard time, and I appreciate them. There's probably no other team outside of the LA Kings that I enjoy keeping an eye on. For some reason, these two organizations are linked. I don't know if the Kings are Flyers West or the Flyers are Kings East, but whatever it is, these two organizations have a rich history going all the way back to the first game in LA Kings history where they played the Flyers. So there's a long, rich history between the two clubs, and it's great to keep up with the Flyers. You can follow me @MayorNHL. Keep an eye at mayorsmanor.com. That's where all the reporting is done for those that like to read. We have Kings of the Podcast for those that like to listen to what we have to say. And we also do free replays of any of the radio spots from Sportsnet or SiriusXM NHL Radio. We post all that on mayorsmanor.com. So you can read, you can listen, whatever floats your boat. We enjoy the interaction with hockey fans. It's a passionate sport. It's a very intelligent sport. I find it to be the best fan base of all the major pro sports.
Yeah, no doubt. John, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
All right, boys, you have a good evening. Stay safe.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so Chef, that was John Hoven. I hope I was able to, dig out some nuggets there, and maybe there were some things that he said that it's just such a contrast on, based on what the Flyers have done. I mean, it was so. I'm not going to say it's seamless compared to the Flyers, but it's been pretty smooth. They've really made some good picks, developed these kids, and it's just something the Flyers have not been able to do, except for a couple players like Farabee and people. I mean, every player, a young player, it's not going to have a linear development. Mm-hmm. But the Flyers have had so many players that have really regressed.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't know. Like while he was talking, I was looking up stuff, and I don't know if they're the Kings. I don't know if they were in a better cap situation when that started or what, but somehow it kind of evolved into wasn't a great cap situation here in Philly. So, but also with the kids, I'm not saying that they have better drafting. I don't know if it's that. I think it goes back to what Shane. You kept bringing up. It's ironic how Shane. Show kept popping up. We were talking about it, and I was actually talking about it the other day too about and quoting back to that one. I really do believe that it's not necessarily the fact that the Flyers didn't draft well; it's the fact that they didn't develop well. I mean, because they're to have that regression like that, to have those players just take such a bad step back, I just feel like he was talking about you were able to look up on the Kings website. You were saying about all the player personnel people.
And the Flyers don't have anything like that.
Exactly, and I think that was something right then and there. And the one thing I struck that I was going to ask, and you brought it up, was what's the game plan when you get a player? I mean, I really do feel like it. You kind of need almost like a recipe if you're in the business, a training plan. If somebody comes in, he's going to spend this time during practice with the skills coach, and then he's going to move over here with defensive training with a paired partner and stuff like that. There's got to be some kind of game plan or recipe card so to speak, to how you develop a player. Now, granted, it's not going to be a one size fits all for each player. Some players are going to need more attention than others. Some are going to obviously be more skilled than others. But still, the point being that you can tailor it. It's a starting point. We know this is how we start, and we're going to tailor it to fit you, I think.
Right. Well, right. They have a timeline for what they want to do.
Yes.
And I think the Flyers are getting that together. And that's kind of why they're building the organization along the lines of what Shane was talking about. But it's taken too long. If you wonder why things have just floated along the way they have, I think that really gets to the heart of it. Although I do think Quentin Byfield is probably a better player projects to be a better player than Nolan Patrick was.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the talent is somewhat comparable when you think about it, but maybe it is the development. But we'll just have to see. Hey, let's move along. There's some news today. John Buccigross puts out a tweet that hints that the Flyers are kind of leaning toward John Tortorella. And it's interesting. He has a picture of Torts with Gritty together with the look emoji or something like that. Obviously, a little birdie told him something. I don't know how reliable it is. I'm not going to go to the bank with it. And then right after that, we find out that Bruce Cassidy gets let go in Boston. And I think Bruce Cassidy won the Jack Adams Award in 20, I believe. If I'm wrong, just reply to our show.
Yeah.
If it calls out. I think he was at least in the running with the AV that year, and I think he won. But
yeah,
it's almost like the Flyers in waiting are maybe benefiting when a lot of people were upset. So what's your response to some of this news?
I know we talked about on the last show, me, you, and Dan, we talked about coaches and who would be here, and I said, it sounded like somebody had said to me in past, it sounded like you were talking yourself out of one coach over another. I said, no, I just think it's realistic. I just don't see certain coaches coming here. Now, I think, is it what I want? No. Do I think that Torts is the best fit here? He's the best short-term solution. If that's what you're going to do, if you don't think you're going to be competitive for a while and you want your team to overachieve, I think Tortorella is the coach for you. Somebody like you just said, Cassidy getting released. That's somebody that you can build a system around with players. But let's face it, I'm not trying to bash, but there isn't really a good system. They have an okay system of players, and if you keep going the way you're going, you're going to keep staying on the fringe of a playoff bubble, and that's not what you want. You need some kind of rebuild here. But I think that if you want somebody that's going to overachieve and get the players to play beyond their means, Tortorella is the coach for you. But I think that's your short window. It's 2 years with him. I think you don't get more than a response, more than 2 years out of that, and then he starts to lose some people. But I do think that the team could use that kind of structure.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, John was talking about earlier about how the GM and the coach have to be on the same page to forge an identity and things like that. So certainly Tortorella, along with coaches like Trotz, check that box. But, like Charlie O'Connor said today, you wonder if that isn't just paving the road for more mediocrity. In other words, they're going to try and win now and go with the so-called aggressive retool, and that's not realistic. They're a 61-point team. If everything went right last year, they were still an 80-point team. I'll maintain that to the very end. So that's my issue with that. I mean, Trotz is a game changer because Trotz might be able to move out a guy like Fletcher. Maybe that gives him trepidations. But one thing I'm hearing on the not so much on the QT. I was listening to Russ Cohen. Scott Arniel is going back to the Winnipeg Jets, and he was with the Islanders, I believe, and he's likely to be part of the staff. So that may be a way of giving a hint that Trotz is going to be going to Winnipeg, because that's what was speculated. By the way, Arniel was with Washington, so I corrected myself there. But yeah, so apparently he's linked to Winnipeg, and that would be an indicator that Trotz may be leaning in that direction. But either way, he's taking his time. Now, I had a chance to listen to Anthony Sanfilippo and our buddy Rush Joy, and they were talking about some of the things that the Flyers would do if a coach like Tortorella was hired. And to me, it's just destined to fail. And like I just mentioned, I just don't understand why they can't accept who they are. Come out with the fans and just be honest. It's fool's gold to hire a coach and think, okay, now we got the right coach. We're going to go back to 2020, when the 2020 was an outlier compared to the other 5 seasons, that surrounded it.
See, and that's what I was talking about our last show. I think it's a waste of space and time to bring in somebody like Trotz, because you don't have the player personnel to support that. And by the time you do, what does they say? 3 years shelf life on a coach anymore in this league? 3 years. Yeah. So what do you do? This team isn't going to be good for 3.5, 4, if that's the way if timelines project, if they did everything right starting this off season, this draft coming up. They make their moves. They get the right players. Then they get the right personnel to coach. It befuddles me, because why would you even bother looking at somebody? This is why I think somebody like Montgomery might be somebody that's going to be for that job. Not that I'm saying that I want that. I'm just saying because he could be a transition coach for 2 to 3 years, and at the end of that, then you go, okay, we've got a makings of a team in place. Maybe we're 1 or 2 moves away from being a serious contender at that point, and then they go out and get a better coach. I don't know. I just don't at this point. But at some point, you have to start somewhere, and that's the most frustrating part. At least start somewhere. Pick a coach and start there right now.
Yeah. Again, without sounding like a broken record, when you're this capped out and you're that bad, I couldn't think of a worse combination.
Yeah.
They're not making the playoffs with that team that they had last year, and now Claude Giroux's not coming back. Mm-hmm. So we can't forget that. But
you mentioned 80 points, right? 80 points if they
if
get
everything went
right.
well.
And what all the teams that made the playoffs in the East were 100 points, correct?
Yeah.
Still not even close.
Yeah. The dichotomy between the teams, I mean, the separation is there. It's undeniable. And there's a lot of talent. Even the Islanders closed really strong. I think they're going to go through some transition, obviously. But the structure of the team is still very good. So they're going to be tough to play against, even if the new coach, Lane Lambert, is not quite what Trotz was.
Yeah.
They have things in place the Flyers simply don't have. It's almost like they're starting over from scratch. This is even beyond AV. This is the worst the Flyers have been since 2007. So I didn't like what I heard from Ant Sanfilippo. If this is what they're really thinking. I mean, he said at one point they were thinking of bringing in 2 head coach level guys.
I heard that.
Like they did with AV Hurrion. And just hire the right guy. Let him pick his staff and stop trying to think outside the box in a stupid way. It just hasn't worked.
What that was just having a backup plan in case we have to fire that guy. That's what it seems like to me.
If you have confidence, that already is like saying I'm not confident in what we're saying.
Exactly.
So
I could see Tocchet being one of the coach selections because one, they think it won't be, and I'm thinking strictly from the Comcast point of view. It's somebody that will put people in seats and maybe sell some extra tickets to go see talking again, old guard, maybe. Yeah.
but
There's going to be some guys out there that think he can do something.
People go to see an assistant coach. You know what I mean?
No, I mean as head coach.
Oh, it's heck. Oh, I don't see that
as head coach, and then I'm not saying I could see it happen only because it's a bad situation and then he becomes that bridge coach that I was talking about, and I could definitely see that happening. Yeah,
that wouldn't get people very excited. They want somebody who has a record of accomplishment. So who meets that definition? So I don't think he does.
No,
but we'll have to see. It's just speculation at this point. If it's Tortorella, that they're going to give a better effort. They're going to have greater structure. They're going to have some fallout. And you know what? They already have a veteran in-house in Cam Atkinson who would go to his teammates with the buy-in angle and just say, listen, Columbus is who they are even now to this day, which is an overachieving bunch with solid structure because of John Tortorella. I mean, that's what he does. Yeah. Are you going to win a cup with what he's doing and how he coaches in 2022? No, I don't think so. Okay, yeah, he won a cup.
But it's a good start. You got to start somewhere.
If the idea is to reestablish who the Flyers are and then go from there and take your time to clear cap space and things like that, but they're not going to advertise it like that. I heard there's a lot of people. They're taking a very collaborative approach to this kind of thing. I hate that. When I hear that, I think too many cooks in the kitchen, and all about that, right?
Yeah. See, you know what that is? That's a bunch of bull right there, because that means nobody's in that office room there, or 10 or 12 people or whatever that collaborative approach is, has enough balls to throw them on the table and say, we're going to do it like this, because that would mean that their neck is on the line. And that's what I fully believe. I fully believe that.
The more people involved in the decision, the less responsibility. You can divvy it up, amortize it, whatever word you want to use. I mean, listen, it's Chuck Fletcher's neck on the line. He's he's hiring his last coach, and he might last the year if it doesn't go well. So we'll have to see. Just follow Twitter and follow your beat reporters, and if we hear something, we'll put it out there. I know that our buddy Jim from High and Wide was talking about the Flyers did interview somebody today. I don't know if they did it in person. I don't know if they did a Zoom call, but Jim Iacovone, good guy. Good guy's been on our show. So moving along to the entry draft, some of the names that we're hearing, don't worry, we're going to have an expert on, along with our draft maven, Dan Silver. And we'll have a really good show because it's a little far out, the draft, but it's getting closer. But some of the names you might want to look at for the Flyers. Drafting, if they stay at number 5, and I have a feeling they will, and I think they should. I'm not a big believer in trading down, because when you come out and say that you lack high-end talent, I think you should take a little bit more of a risk and take a swing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, they did that the last couple of years with some players, and I think in the long run, I think that is going to serve them well. So let's take a look at some of the guys. I mean, they did it with Tyson Forster. Even in a second rounder, Tuamalo was kind of like a stretch for some people, but if he hits, the high end is there. So I see the rationale. Okay, so David Jiricek, a defenseman from the Czech Republic, 6'3", 190, right-handed shot.
Oh, yeah.
And he's the guy they're talking about, Simon Nemec. He's a Slovakian, 6 foot, 190. I think he's a little bit more of an offensive player, a little smaller. Corey Pryman compares him to Mackenzie Weegar, and Jiricek, they compared him to Pietrangelo. Again, these are rough comparisons done by one pundit. Okay, so there's kind of a separation there. And then you look at players. A really interesting guy. He's played wing, but he projects as a center, kind of like Pierre-Luc Dubois. So there's this other apparently French-Canadian player, Cutter Gauthier, played left wing, 6'2", almost 6'3", 190. And He's got a high-end shot. They think he's versatile enough to play center. And if that is the case, then he could be somebody that, like Pierre-Luc Dubois, ends up a little bit higher than he was originally projected. And we'll have to see how that works out. And just a couple other names, if you start hearing them, Matthew Savoy,
yes,
a center. He's 5'9", really, really skilled, and compared to like Jaden Schwartz, and like the Flyers probably are not going to get a chance unless they move up to get a guy like Logan Cooley, who's more rated a little higher. But you know, Savoy could end up being as good. We're not really sure, but he's not rated as high. So he's an interesting player if the Flyers aren't hung up on the size issue, which recently they haven't shown to be. Joachim Kemmel, I'm sorry, he's a Finn. He's a right winger. Again, more like 5'11", 170, right-hand shot. He's a mid-6 player, but he's Finnish players, pretty tough guys. So, you know, he might be more of a finesse player, but finesse player from Finland is usually a little rough around the edges, and that's not such a bad thing in the NHL. So there are some names. I apologize for if there's any mispronunciations, but they're not going to get Slafkovsky, Shane Wright, or Logan Cooley. I really doubt that any of those guys are going to be available. Just the guys that.
Well, I had a nice little long drive today coming up from the south there, so I put on some podcasts and I was listening to Off the Post with Russ going.
Yes,
and they were talking about Matt Savoy, and he was saying that somebody like of his caliber could be there, go up higher than what was originally thought, because when you start looking down what people start making their lists of what they need and best player available and stuff like that, somebody like that, a scorer like such as and somebody creative like him, kind of goes higher up the list only because because that's what boxes are needed. So sometimes you see that happen, and especially since this draft, you could get somebody a little bit later in the second round. Hopefully a pleasant surprise in the second round too. That it's not the end of the world. So he was talking specifically about Matt Savoy and thinking that he could go a little bit higher than originally thought, just for that reason.
Yeah, well, the Flyers are they may try to move up. They don't have a second round pick right now. Let's see if they maybe move a salary for a second round pick. Maybe Oscar Lindblom. It's not something I want to happen, but they need salary relief for some, in some manner. And of course, it might be something they do. Oscar's got a contract that's not really appealing, but if they think other teams think he could get back to that, we'll have to see if the Flyers can move a player, if that's what they want to do. Just a quick update, which by the time you hear this won't be an update.
I was just about to bring it out.
The Avalanche just eliminated the Oilers. They're going to the Stanley Cup final, and they're going to play either Tampa Bay or the Rangers. So now that the Avalanche has won this game 4 and they're going in, what's your thoughts about the Tampa Rangers series? It's a 2-1. Tampa largely outplayed yesterday, and the Rangers have been very impressive.
Yeah. In the whole bracket thing, I had Colorado and Florida at the end. I like to think I'm not going to be that far off if it's Colorado and Tampa Bay, same state at least. But they got their hands full. But what? Vasilevsky's been kind of unsteady. He's been a little bit shaky. He goes on a tear, then that's it. It's just these games have been a little bit of high scoring. If they go on a tear here, both these goalies are very good. You can probably see the best goalie duel in the NHL playoffs this year. I just think if all it needs is Vasilevsky to get a little hot, because I just think that Tampa can score just as much as the Rangers can, and it's going to be entertaining. I still think it's going to go 7 games though, but I think it's Tampa. I didn't expect the Rangers to get as far as they did. It's a good surprise for them, but I think it ends here. I think that Tampa advances on.
Interesting. Both teams have a lot of injuries right now. I mean, Colorado is doing without Kadri. Kemper, you're not sure when he's coming back. Kadri just had surgery for a thumb injury, and they don't have Samuel Girard. And, of course, the Tampa's waiting on Braden Point. If that can work out for him, he would be the greatest addition out of all.
I thought they said he was coming back next game.
What, Braden Point?
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah.
No? Or is he still day-to-day? I guess he's day-to-day again. Yeah,
I'm not really sure. If you have an update on that, I'm like everybody else, I guess, in the respect that I'll be watching the wires to see what the story is with him. But, the Colorado Avalanche appear to be they obviously are Stanley Cup bound. I picked them in Florida, and I thought Florida was going to win, so it shows you what a non-expert I am. So the Rangers, I don't know. When you got Shesterkin starting to replicate what he did during the regular season, and the Rangers look so fast, Braden Point better come back quickly, or the Rangers just are going to get their one game in Tampa, and they're like a fortress in New York. It should be very, very intriguing to watch that game now that the semifinal in the West is over. So, Chef, let's wrap it up there. Where can people find you on Twitter, and what else you got going on?
You can find me at Chef to Left B on Twitter, and pretty much I'm just I'm drinking these Stanley Cup playoffs in. I'm really enjoying it, man. It's been some great hockey.
It looks nothing like what the Flyers played all year. I can tell you that, right? No. We definitely agree on that one. Yeah,
even the slow teams in the playoffs look 10 times faster than the Flyers did.
It's unbelievable. Chuck, just admit who you are, okay? If people will forgive you. I mean, just the facade's not going to work. Bringing in Torts and overachieving so you can become a 90-point team and miss the playoffs. I mean, maybe they'll establish something, but it's not going to work. You got to rip this thing asunder.
Yeah, you could be a 100-point team and miss it next season now.
Yeah, just deal with reality. It's the best way to live your life. It can be bitter, but you save yourself from disappointment. Anyway, you can follow me, Isaiah, ISAIAH_520. Isaiah, don't forget the _520. That's a personal account. There's a lot of different stuff on there. You may like, you may not like. And, of course, you can follow the O&B Puckcast at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck. And if you could rate and subscribe on YouTube, hit that notification bell, give us a rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Next review we get, we'll read it, hopefully if it's a good one. Now, it really helps if you subscribe, hit that notification bell on YouTube, because it moves us up the charts when people are looking for Philadelphia Flyer podcasts. And we really appreciate, as we have started our 6th season, your listenership. We're going to have more good shows coming forward. We're going to cover the draft a little closer. We'll have probably, by the time we do our next show, maybe the Flyers will actually have a coach. Yeah. And we'll be talking about what that means going forward.
And just an update, he is ruled out for Game 4. Braden Point will not be playing Game 4.
Okay, yeah, they're waiting on him. They're going to need him to come back.
Yep.
If they're going to beat Colorado, if they can get that far. I'm not sure they'll beat the Rangers. But with that, everybody, take care.